Hi there, I'm the Mythkeeper. Welcome back to my channel, the best place on the internet for Pathfinder lore and history. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe. And if there's anything you'd like me to talk about in particular, let me know in the comments below. This week we're going back to my creature feature series, and this is going to be another collection. This video is called Dungeon Denizens, and it's a collection of all manner of creatures that you might encounter in a dungeon. It's a fun one. Enjoy. Hot on the heels of my Darklands videos, we take a look at some of its weirder denizens. A bear-sized armadillo that swims through the earth and thinks halflings are a tasty snack. An intelligent magical cloak that hangs around in coat closets hoping someone might wear it. A garbage-eating, three-armed, three-tentacled sewer monster. A predatory beast that conceals itself like a common stalactite or stalagmite. These iconic, strangely evolved or magically created creatures and many more are the classic monsters found in dungeons all across Golarion. In this video, I'm going to take a look in more detail at the strange ecology of some of these classic dungeon creatures. The 8 creature types I'll be discussing here today are the cave worm, especially their largest variant, the infamous purple worm, the cloakers, also known as the Fulthrethu, the eye and mouth-covered gibbering mouthers, the deadly land sharks, also known as the Bulettes, various mutant bats, including the eye-covered Clawbat and the ghoulish Skavelings, the weirdly camouflaged ropers, the much-feared rust monsters, bane of the armored warrior, and finally, the ravenous sewer beasts, also known as the Otyughs. The cave worms. Golarion's great philosophers and scholars have often hypothesized that the world itself could be compared to a decaying apple with a corrupt core, wherein grotesque creatures carve tunnels and caverns of immense proportions through the flesh of the planet itself, occasionally giving rise to deep-spawned horrors. How else to explain so many of the terrible things that come up from the deep? On one account they are correct. There are breeds of mighty cave worms that spawn in the deep places of the world. Among these titanic abominations, one breed, the purple worm, is known to be the farthest wandering such monstrosity, carving their vast tunnels from the inner sea regions to Arcadia to Tianxia. And while scholars have accurately speculated on certain aspects of these organisms, they have not well understood the origins of these beasts. Contrary to popular belief, these colossal beasts do not originate from the dark depths within the world, but instead hail from the black expanse above. The purple worms originate from the dark tapestry beyond Golarion skies, introduced to the planet during its primeval days when meteoric bombardments were commonplace. In ancient times, when the world was young and celestial impacts shaped its landscape, some rocky missiles served as cradles for resilient organisms that hibernated inside, surviving the rigors of extra-atmospheric travel within these stony cocoons. While many creatures vaporized upon impact, others were buried in the craters, awakening from dormancy and exposed to a world rich in life-giving elements, allowing them to thrive. Purple worms invariably become the apex predators in their territory, traveling through all 3 dimensions of their subterranean environment and its otherwise unyielding stone. With a full-grown specimen 80 feet in length, 5 feet in diameter, and weighing around 40,000 pounds, there are few opponents that can stand against one. These worms prefer to consume organic material. However, they can also survive by extracting minerals from the rock they process through their gullets, providing elements for their natural armor, poisonous stings, and sustaining their metabolisms in the absence of abundant organic food. Despite their ability to survive, purple worms are plagued by an insatiable hunger. They do not sleep in the conventional manner, but they do periodically enter a long period of hibernation that may last for several years at a time. Including hibernation periods, such worms can live up to 800 years, continuously growing by adding ring segments to their bodies. These worms are hermaphroditic, mating with each other every decade or so, resulting in both individuals laying clutches of dozens of eggs within a mucus cocoon in a cavern. The worms will then collapse all entrances before abandoning it. While most eggs are destroyed by this burial, 10 to 20 larval worms typically hatch, engaging in a feeding frenzy until only 1 or 2 survive. Once capable of burrowing through rock, the surviving larvae separate and quickly mature in only a handful of years. Though the standard purple worm is the most commonly encountered form of titanic cave worm, it is certainly not the only breed of such creature. Other variants include the aquatic worm or mottled worm. Similar in many respects to the purple worm, save for its brown and gray coloration, the aquatic or mottled worm is naturally an aquatic variant of the cave worm and commonly dwells in salt or fresh water. Rather than conserve oxygen while they burrow as their violet cousins do, mottled worms are actually able to draw oxygen from water into their bloodstream via specialized gill-like organs. As a result, like fish, mottled worms can stay submerged indefinitely if the surrounding water is properly oxygenated. Mottled worms are also able to survive out of water for several hours, though the uncomfortable drying process makes them inclined to return to the water after about an hour or so on land. Mottled worms cannot burrow through stone like other cave worms can, but are adept at moving through muck and sand found on the seafloor and tidal shelves. Varieties exist that lurk both in shallow waters, preying on aquatic species, birds, and land animals, and in the deepest reaches of the sea, where they build gigantic upright tubular formations created from their body waste. Unlike purple worms, which tend to be solitary, mottled worms of this deep-dwelling variety typically live in colonies of 3 to 12 individuals. The sight of a dozen such monstrous 20-ton worms give even the mighty krakens pause before entering their hunting grounds. Bowl. The bowl is such a titanic variant of the cave worm that it makes the common purple worm appear petite by comparison. Where the purple worm is 80 feet long and weighs over 20 tons, the typical bowl is hundreds of feet long and weighs thousands of tons. How such a colossal creature can exist at all beggars the mind. At this scale, bowls are naturally among the largest of living creatures, worm-like leviathans of such size that few can claim to have seen one wholly from head to tail, and those who do tend towards madness and other afflictions that carry with them a heavy burden of doubt. The coloration of these creatures' coiling bodies ranges widely, from darker blues and purples to paler greys, yellows, or bleached white, with a cavernous mouth consisting of long, bony jaws that extend and unfold from the creature's head when it feeds. Another unique characteristic of the bowl over other types of giant worm is its slimy breath weapon, which allows it to cover a nearly 1,000-foot area in powerful acidic slime. In Golarion they are extremely rare. Fewer than 10 are thought to exist in total, with some scholars believing that there may only be one such mighty individual bowl, and that all the rare sightings have in fact been of the same singular creature. Mercifully so, as regions inhabited by bowls quickly become a barren wasteland. Like other cave worms, bowls themselves seem able to eat and digest anything and everything, and in time can reduce a huge area to a honeycombed network of immense tunnels. These regions swiftly collapse, leaving behind crumpled, rubble-filled pits of vast and terrifying size. Legends whispered by Golarion's rare alien species and other space travelers speak of entire worlds being reduced to rubble by bowls. They also tell of the danger of allowing these monsters into inhabited worlds, for their hunger is eternal, and a relatively small number of bowls can do incredible damage on a continental scale. Crimson worm. This enormous cave worm varietal is covered, much like the purple worm is, with hard plates of chitinous armor, but they are of a distinctly red or crimson hue. This deep vermilion variant of the legendary purple worm is of even greater size, and has adapted to survive in volcanic regions, and it can survive tunneling through hot magma and lava. At other times they can be found dwelling in remote badlands and rocky deserts. Some crimson worms are able to hold a certain amount of molten rock in their gullet, and disgorge it upon their enemies in a horrific exhalation of burning vomit. Great worms. Less common than purple worms or even their mottled worm cousins, these are found only in the most desolate regions. Thought by many to be mere legend, the great worms have been exposed to great magic, such by slowly digesting artifacts embedded in their gullets, consuming the foci of ley lines, interacting with magical portals, or having slowly digested a mighty demon. The worms then gain powers appropriate to the magic they have consumed, and sometimes grow to unusual sizes or gain near-human intelligence. Others possess stranger abilities still. Most have extended lifespans, and some are speculated to be over 1,500 years old. The abilities of the great worms include magical displacement fields that render them difficult to injure, the ability to regenerate almost any injury, and like bowls, they often have a breath weapon of some sort, though that projection often has an elemental dimension to it, such as electricity or fire. It is often said of these most esoteric of cave worms that no two are completely alike. Cloakers. Cloakers are bizarre creatures whose interactions with surface folk are almost universally violent. They are deep-dwelling creatures, avoiding the upper levels of the Darklands. In the deeper levels, they happily murder unsuspecting visitors, leading many to believe they are little more than aggressive beasts. However, cloakers are actually quite intelligent, but cursed with a terrible paranoia that makes them antisocial, even towards most of their own kind. Named cloakers by surface folk because they superficially resemble a large carnivorous cloak, these beings are called the Fulthrethu in their own language. Gifted with natural camouflage to help them blend into rocks, cloakers are naturally patient hunters who can rest in one place, often clinging to a wall or ceiling, for hours at a time, lightly sleeping as they await their prey. Despite their size and intelligence, cloakers are physiologically simple organisms and can subsist on small animals, fungus, and even moss or lichen. Their only bone-like structures are their teeth, claws, and tails, and their nutritional requirements, once fully grown, are minimal. They are capable of true flight, and this ability requires them to flap their wings, but also appears to be at least partially psionic. It is strong enough to leap into the air from standing start and fly immediately. The flat shape of its body means a cloaker can pass through a gap 6 inches high, as long as there is room for its 8-foot wingspan. It can fold itself in half or even in thirds to reduce this horizontal requirement at the expense of greater height. They can also crawl along the ground in an inchworm-like manner, or even lie almost completely flat and creep at half speed like a slug. Given their ray-like shape and ability to breed with true rays, it is clear that the cloakers are an evolved form of the docile aquatic ray. Their origin, therefore, is not surprisingly tied to the Algolthu, another breed of species engineered by them, but which I didn't touch on in that video. Evidently, they were engineered as a race of spies who could watch over their human and Ulatkini minions, and even advise or defend key agents on land, yet which would not be disposed to band together to overturn the Algolthu themselves. The result of this breeding program and magical experimentation was the Fulthrethu, stealthy, intelligent, and suspicious. Those who study the creatures often speak of the mystery of the cloaker's brain, and how understanding its thoughts or even its language is quite difficult. The reason for this confusion is threefold. First, cloakers are almost universally insane, and any sane person listening to one has difficulty parsing when the cloaker is actively engaging in conversation or when it's merely echoing fragments of its own confused inner monologue. Second, a cloaker's brain is more like a shark's than a human, and it prioritizes information very differently. Someone unfamiliar with this quirk may think the cloaker is focusing on trivial or obscure points, but limited evidence provided by Sahagin and druids with awakened shark companions illustrate that the thought processes and manners of speech are similar to those of sharks. Third, they are the creation of the Algolthu, and many of the things that render the Bulettes utterly alien to the human mind apply to the Fulthrethu as well. Naturally, the cloaker race was not always as it is now. Long ago, they were merely bred to be suspicious, tasked by their Algolthu masters with keeping an eye on their servitors. When the humans rebelled against their enslavement, the former Aboleth masters destroyed what they could of human civilization. Without human slaves to spy on, the Algolthu discarded the cloakers as well, driving them into the wild places. Bereft of goals and leadership, the cloakers eventually turned to ancient primordial gods who filled the empty void in their lives with madness. Most commonly among these great old gods were Dagon or Cthulhu. Distrustful of even their own kind except under the best of circumstances, the cloakers scattered, finding places to hide where food was plentiful, yet still compelled by their Aboleth-programmed urges to observe and remember. If cured of their madness in such a way that their offspring would also be born sane, cloakers would quickly become a powerful force within the Darklands, using their specialized abilities to become information brokers, spies, assassins, or bodyguards. Though most cloakers today are solitary, a few band together in small cults devoted to the outer gods. Such groupings of cloakers are particularly xenophobic and dangerous, often led by a cunning and devoted cult leader less afflicted by the prevailing madness than others of its kind. A few variant forms of Fulthrethu can be found throughout Golarion. Amphibious. Perhaps the most common variant, apart from the Darklands-dwelling cave varietals, these cloakers can breathe water as easily as air, and can swim as easily as they fly. Some have devolved so much that they can no longer breathe air at all, and only live in the waters of the Darklands, such as the sightless sea of Orv. Dark Mantles. These are not technically a variant form of the cloaker, but a related species, thought to have been adapted from an octopus or squid in the same way the cloaker was evolved from a manta ray. Like a hideous hovering octopus, this creature drops from the cave ceiling, seeking to ensnare creatures within its webbed tentacles. Dark Mantles do not possess the same advanced intelligence of Fulthrethu, and are more animalistic in nature. Fungoid cloakers. Some cloakers become infested with one or more kinds of parasitic fungi, perhaps from battling Darklands veggie-pygmies. These cloakers will usually have large patches of mushrooms growing on their backs, allowing them to lie on the ground and look like a pile of refuse. Some have patches of phosphorescent fungus growing on their underbellies, which they use as lures to attract prey or lead unsuspecting creatures into traps, while others achieve a kind of symbiosis with a more dangerous fungal type, such as brown, violet, or yellow mold. Shadow Brood Cloakers. believed to be cloakers infused with the energy of the Plane of Shadow, perhaps by the efforts of the Darklands' native Caligni, especially those who are adherents of the Church of Zon Kuthon. These midnight black cloakers are often mistaken for incorporeal undead. They can use their Shadow Shift ability to produce effects identical to the Shadow Walk spell, and can also cast areas of magical darkness. Lending further credence to the theory that the Caligni had a hand in this breed, many Shadow Brood can be found in the major Caligni cities of the Darklands, where they can be found as allies to the Darkfolk. Vampiric cloakers. Occasionally yellow-grey cloakers hatch from unfertilized eggs. These half-dead cloakers thrive on blood and attach themselves to their prey like leeches. Despite the name, vampiric cloakers are not undead. However, it has been reported that rare few do become true vampires, though the mechanics for this are unknown. The telltale sign of such cloakers are the large numbers of exsanguinated corpses that can invariably be found in and around their caves. Web-spinner cloakers. Where the Shadow Brood can be found in service to the Caligni, the web-spinners are more commonly found alongside the Dark Elf Cabals. Created by Dark Elf flesh warping using ettercap and spider essence, these cloakers can create sheets of sticky webs like monstrous spiders and shoot web nets like ettercaps. These cloakers also possess poisonous stingers at the tips of their tails. Gibbering Mouthers. Easily mistaken for a kind of ooze, the Gibbering Mouther is actually a more structurally consistent aberration form. This horrid mass of eyes, mouths, and formless flesh stares in all directions, its countless maws yammering ceaselessly. Disgusting, loathsome, and hungry, these are the only words that can properly describe the Gibbering Mouther. A foul beast that lurks in underground caves, sewers, and your darkest nightmares, Mouthers have no societal, ecological, or religious significance other than their ability to drive those that listen to them mad. Some scholars believe that Gibbering Mouthers are a lesser variant of the much more dangerous Shoggoth, while others have theorized that they are a separate breed altogether, a kind of punishment enacted by some powerful being or deity inflicted on those who have offended it. These creatures are ecologically perplexing. Amorphous in shape and size and reproducing asexually, the Mouthers pose numerous threats to their prey all at once. First and foremost is the noise. The gibbering of the Mouther produces a kind of tonal cacophony that affects its prey. This is a magical ability and leads to temporary confusion, sometimes preventing the victims from acting at all, and other times sending them into a frenzied rage in which they are unable to distinguish friend from foe. Secondly, there are the creature's many mouths, each of which can bite independently and which are optimized for siphoning blood from a victim, like a vampire bat or a true vampire. Thirdly, there is its ooze-like property, which allows it to fully engulf smaller creatures. Within its fleshy mass, hundreds of mouths will form, each attempting to exsanguinate the engulfed victim. Finally, there is its acidic spittle. Even if a gibbering mouther cannot get close enough to bite or engulf its prey, it is dangerous, able to emit a stream of acidic spittle that can both burn and blind a foe. In addition to all of this, mouthers possess one final strange feature. A gibbering mouther can cause stone and earth under its body to grow soft and muddy. This is a supernatural and magical ability. The ground remains muddy even as it moves off to another location, and while a gibbering mouther can move through these areas with ease, other creatures struggle to move through them. Thus a clue that a gibbering mouther is nesting nearby in the Darklands is the presence of mud and loose soil, even when there is little moisture in the area. Fewer variants exist of this type of dungeon denizen, however some do. One curious variant of the gibbering mouther is known as the Goggling Watcher. This horrid mass of eyes, mouths, and formless flesh stares in all directions, yet its maws are utterly silent, unlike its gibbering kin. Exceedingly xenophobic, Goggling Watchers seek to eliminate any creatures other than themselves. Where the Watchers lack the gibbering madness of the mouther, it instead possesses various eye rays that it can emit from the numerous eyes that it can distend from tendril-like eye stalks. These rays may blind, freeze, or burn, or even disintegrate their enemies in their most powerful form. Then there is, of course, the Shoggoth. Most scholars believe that the mouther is a degenerated form of Shoggoth, descended from this substantially more ancient and more powerful creature. The Shoggoth is a creature of the Dark Tapestry, not man-sized at all, but a huge creature almost 20 feet in diameter. Shoggoths are also more intelligent than their lesser, more mundane kin, but you wouldn't know it from their behavior. If they have goals, they are tied to the most abstruse deities among the outer gods, such as Azathoth, Yog-Sothoth, and of course the dreaded black goat with 1,000 young. Some Shoggoths are even more intelligent and deadly than regular Shoggoths. These entities are capable of magical flight. They can feed on and drain the intellect of those that see them, and lay eyes on their many gibbering mouths, and can discharge powerful bolts of dark eldritch power. These are known as cogent Shoggoths, and these cogents are thought to be living extensions of the great old gods themselves. Land sharks. While the process that created them has been long lost, many rumors abound regarding the origins of the land shark, also sometimes called the Bulette. According to popular lore, a cabal of arch-wizards seeking new beasts to guard their secret lairs created them thousands of years ago. Many claim they are a cross between two ordinary animals, the snapping turtle and the armadillo being the most common, which are then infused with the demonic essence or other such nefarious thing. Though no one alive today knows the absolute truth behind their origin, one thing is clear. Land sharks are insatiable predators. Hungry creatures that roam from region to region seeking more abundant prey. They devour anything that moves. Nothing that can walk, crawl, swim, or run is immune to the hunger and rage of the land shark. Those who come face to face with a land shark and live to share the story talk of a mindless, emotionless brute. Sometimes they tell of a land shark heading into a village, gliding just beneath the earth's surface, snatching townsfolk or livestock. Others speak of them erupting in the middle of their camp and consuming everything too slow to flee. Land sharks, it is clear, cannot be reasoned with. They are hard to trick and can only be stopped with brute force. Voracious and tenacious, they hardly stop eating long enough to rest. Land sharks typically only live for 20 years, and spend all but the last few as solitary hunters. They prefer to roam the Darklands, where their powerful tunneling ability confers the greater advantage on surprising their prey. But unlike most of the creatures I'm discussing here today, they can in fact be found in a much greater variety of ecosystems, from temperate hills and plains to high mountains or deserts. Regardless of the biomes in which they may be found, it's rare to find land sharks dead of natural causes in the wild, as in addition to the creature's tendency to die in battle, sages believe that most aging land shark organs simply give out while they are engaged in the physical exertion of tunneling, entombing them where they fall, beneath tons of dirt and stone. Physically, land sharks are quite complicated creatures. They are born live, and typically singly to a mated pair. A baby land shark possesses the same insatiable hunger as its parents, and begins to hunt the moment it's born. Their bodies grow to be quite massive, topping out at 15 feet in length and 8 feet or more in height. Young land sharks mature quickly, reaching full size in less than a year. A land shark's armor plating is made of the same material as its skeletal structure. Young land sharks bear soft and malleable armor plates, and dwarven blacksmiths pay exorbitant amounts of gold to acquire them, as they can shape the plates before they harden, thus producing land shark plate armor. Once a land shark reaches its full adult size, its armor plating is as hard as steel, making it a very difficult creature to penetrate with either blade or arrow. Land sharks have massive torsos and thick legs that end in long, incredibly sharp claws that they use to burrow through the earth. Their musculature is entirely focused on moving the jaw for eating and the legs for digging, making their claws fearsome weapons and their bite a terrifying thing to behold. A series of elastic tendons run the length of each leg and are anchored at the knees, hips, and ankles, originally evolved to help the creature extricate itself from collapsing tunnels. Yet these powerful muscles allow the ponderous beast to leap incongruously into the air with little effort, bringing all 4 claws to bear on an adjacent and usually astonished opponent. Beneath the skin, land sharks are designed to eat. They have 6 stomachs, and each processing food differently. The stomach acids of a land shark can melt armor and lay waste to magic trinkets. Only the toughest, magically enhanced metals can resist their digestive process. This lets land sharks eat their prey whole, gear and all, in the case of humanoids, without stopping to think about what they're eating. Their stomachs are disgusting, churning masses that break nearly everything down into a smelly pulp. Alchemists prize the stomach acid of land sharks for its powerfully caustic properties. The 2 most common variants of the land shark beyond the common bulette are the rolling bulette, the spiny bulette, and the xenarth. Rolling bulettes are a variant that are typically found in sparsely populated arid grasslands, such as the windswept wastes, or even in deserts rather than in the Darklands. They possess the unique ability to curl up into a ball and roll in order to acquire great speed and cover large distances in search of prey. Rumors that certain remote cultures have been able to domesticate such creatures are likely to be greatly exaggerated, as the rolling bulettes are just as temperamental as other varietals. Spiny bulettes are covered in hundreds of large spines or quills, which jut out from its armor plates. Mostly these spines provide an additional layer of defense, and makes attacking such creatures a difficult proposition. But some spiny bulettes possess the ability to throw these spines, giving them a powerful ranged attack as well.
Finally, there is the Xenarth. The most feared Bulette mutation are the Xenarths. Also called the Ichor sharks, Xenarths are an incredibly rare species that most believe long vanished from the world. It has long been suspected that land sharks were originally created to achieve their prodigious levels of strength and power through infusions of demonic ichor. Xenarths, however, are much more demonic in nature. Xenarths are demon-tainted beasts covered in slimy red ichor that burns like acid when touched and helps propel them through the soil much quicker than the common bulette. Xenarths are brutal and even more frightening than their cousins. While the common bulette eats to fuel an insatiable hunger, Xenarths attack for the pure pleasure of destruction, and have been known to eat, regurgitate to empty their belly, and move on to yet other food. Mutant bats. The Darklands are the favoured nesting grounds of various breeds of bat. Some are quite mundane, but others, like the dire bat discussed in my megafauna video, are quite monstrous and horrifying. The world of Golarion includes a great many breeds of magically altered bats that infest the Darklands, and 3 varietals stand out above the rest: the Clawbat, the Mobat, and the Skaveling. A Clawbat is an aberrant mutation of a bat, a leathery piece of skin stretched across a frame of joints and bony knobs that beats awkwardly through the air. Eyes glare from the folds of its thick wings, writhing tentacles surround its sucker-like maw, and a long thin tongue darts forth seemingly at random to lash the air around it. Individually they are not too threatening to a seasoned adventurer, but Clawbats nest in large numbers. Clawbats swarm forth from their shadowy dens to hunt by night, thirsting for blood, scavenging from the victims of great nocturnal hunters, and stalking those foolish enough not to fear the dangers in the dark. Drawn by the scent of spilled blood, the Clawbats fearlessly follow deadly beasts, and more than one traveler has narrowly escaped a predator's nearly lethal ambush only to find his luck change as a swarm of wings and eyes descend upon him. The span of an average Clawbat's dual pair of wings stretches 3 feet wide, lifting aloft rubbery bodies that weigh 2 to 4 pounds. Some tell of more monstrous Clawbats, with wings that blot out the stars as they swoop away with children and small animals. But these are rare and aberrant creatures. Most Clawbats are in fact poor fighters. They prefer to fly past victims, striking quickly to draw blood, and then making pass after pass, aggravating their victims' existing wounds with their ribbon-like tongues. This tactic rarely wins the scavengers more than a drop or 2 of nourishment per attack, driving them to harass a victim until it drops. Sometimes, when the wounds of a Clawbat's prey prove too insignificant to fell it, Clawbats attack more directly, circling to peel away strip after strip of flesh in wet grabs of their tentacular maws. After their prey has fallen to the pain of a dozen such wounds, Clawbats land and vigorously lap up their meal until their bellies are bloated with gore. Aiding Clawbats in their hunts is their acrid saliva, a stinging, milky white fluid that possesses an anticoagulant quality, causing their bites to leave messy wounds that bleed until treated. This effect allows Clawbats to surprise attack most creatures, and wait safely out of reach until their prey collapses. Healthy, larger prey can typically withstand the assault of a lone Clawbat, but a whole clutch of the creatures might easily throw even a sturdy beast into a panicked, bleeding terror. The freedom with which Clawbat wounds bleed also serves to attract other Clawbats in the vicinity, and a few scratches might potentially bring an entire clutch down upon even a slightly wounded creature. Mobats are another variant of magically altered bat. These magical giant bats have a wingspan that measures almost a dozen feet in width, and have squat, upturned snouts with rows of needle-like teeth, often contorted into a wide, wolfish grin. Survivors of a lost era, they are rarely seen beyond the dark forests and deep caves they haunt. Although Mobats are omnivores, they vastly prefer the flavor of fresh meat over that of other food. While physically much more bat-like than Clawbats, they do possess unique characteristics that differentiates them from more mundane bats and even dire bats. That is, their unnerving and magical screech. These screeches can stun foes, completely incapacitating them and paralyzing them in place. Mobats, as we will see, appear to be a relative of the slightly larger Skavelings, the preferred mounts of the Urdefons, the Orvian vampires discussed in both my Darklands video and my Undead Creature feature. It is likely that they are either an accidental byproduct of the breeding program that led to the Skaveling, or were intentionally bred by the Urdefons to serve the Darklanders as scouts and messengers, a kind of Darklands variant form of falconry. Speaking of the Skavelings, these are the largest varietal of mutant bat. Their wingspans reach 20 feet across, and like the Mobats, they possess a powerful magical screech that stuns creatures that are not other Skavelings. Urdefons also appear immune to the Skaveling screech. Skavelings are also often called ghoul bats because upon reaching maturity, Urdefons ritually slay the bats using necrotic poisons, then raise the corpses so they'll serve them more loyally as mounts and guardians. The variant undead creature type that the bats become are ghouls, as their pseudonym suggests, and so the Skavelings used as mounts by the Urdefons also carry ghoul fever. Once raised to their final undead form, these monstrously sized undead bats thereafter have mottled decayed flesh and eyes that smolder with an unholy green glow. Roper. Ropers rule the darkest, most forlorn caves beneath the earth, feasting on the flesh of anyone foolish or ignorant enough to trespass. Roper territory riddles the crust of the world. These strange mazes, wrought either by the Ropers themselves or by whatever greater powers preceded them, are filled with stalactites and stalagmites like giant teeth rising from the floors and ceilings, and strange arrays of stones to boggle any architect's wildest fever dreams. Here Ropers creep through the bones of the earth. They hide among outcroppings of rock or skulk around stalactites, lashing out of the darkness with wiry strands of powerful sinew, crushing the breath from men and dragging them like screaming babes into maws of grinding stony teeth. Their rocky hides crave the dark, and they blend into the palette of the surrounding environs. Most victims don't even perceive the danger until their limbs are encircled by the Ropers' strength-sapping strands. Stone and rock are their silent allies, hiding them from prying eyes of trespassing explorers until it is too late. This stealth they possess, their ability to conceal themselves as nothing more than an ordinary stalactite, is hardly necessary most of the time. A Roper's hide is nigh impenetrable, turning aside axe and blade like the most ancient dwarven wrought stone, and even potent arcane assaults simply slide off from their shale-like forms. Their ability to coordinate 6 attacking strands at once allows these devastating monsters to easily neutralize an entire party of interlopers from a distance. Ropers are deadly adversaries in a stand-up fight, let alone when attacking with complete surprise. Though these prodigious predators possess the strength to tear a man in quarters or bite him clean in half, few adventurers realize Ropers also possess a canny intellect, and a strange philosophy spurred by darkness and agony. These cryptic killers gather in deep caves from the light of men, lean their rocky points together like monks at vespers, and share strange mutters in the dark. What fell musings these cabals of Ropers share remain forever a mystery to surface dwellers, but the urgency that drives their meetings cannot bode well for mankind. Ropers resemble uncarved stone in every respect, and until their strands peel from their frames and maws crack open wide, they are almost impossible to discern among rocky environs. Some look like simple conical stalagmites, but others' shapes vary widely and are even more mutable, allowing them to appear as a bevy of rock formations to further confuse trespassers. Their hides are harder than most stone and half a foot thick. Ropers are amazing creatures. Their stone-like qualities don't stop at their exteriors. They have no blood, but instead strange contractions pump fine dust through the rocky canals within the Roper's innards. Their strands are filaments of grainy, sewn-like sinew, at once as hard as marble, yet as tensile as a worked leather whip. The strands are capable of delicate movement, but strong enough to strangle an orc to death, and strange pores in the Roper's strands drain away a person's strength. The filaments numb the victim's muscles by constricting pressure points throughout the body, eventually resulting in utter paralysis, leaving them completely helpless. A Roper senses prey by means of strange tiny filaments studding its pointed crown. These filaments behave for the most part like any normal animal's eyes, save that a Roper can perceive through all of them in conjunction. It's possible these integrated eye stalks are what allows a Roper to attack with all 6 strands in concert. A Roper's maw can seal almost completely shut, appearing as solid, unbroken stone. When opened, this cavernous orifice spreads 2 feet wide. The circular saw-like action of a Roper's jaws can crush granite, and makes even shorter work of bone and gristle. Most organic matter is spewed back out eventually. Flesh and meat are indigestible to a Roper, but bone nourishes these brutal creatures, ground to dust by the gnashing action of the Roper's crushing insides. The origin of this bizarre rocky creature is a mystery. The Roper's freakish obeisance to Rovagug inspires many scholars to posit the rough beast's hand in their creation, but others claim these strange monsters are the result of some mad wizard's meddling. One ancient tale speaks to a gout of Rovagug's blood spilt below the earth, tainting the insides of an ancient cavern, and it is said that from this sick, polluted crucible the first Ropers were born. Ropers favor the flesh of humans above all other prey, but taste has little to do with this preference. Ropers take perverse pleasure in eating intelligent food, capable of holding a conversation. They thrive on the pain their food experiences, and the higher the intellect of the devoured, the more a roper savors their agony. The animal pain experienced by a lower creature is nothing compared to the dread realization and succulent anguish a sentient person undergoes as he, paralyzed with weakness, watches the roper slowly munch off his limbs. More than a few adventurers have delayed their demise long enough for help to arrive by keeping a roper's intellectual interest. Thus, after one's limbs are deadened, a sharp tongue and quick wit are still potent weapons against death at a roper's maw. Anyone able to wax philosophical might stave off the inevitable for a few days, perhaps with one or more limbs gone, the wound bound with a roper strand as a tourniquet. While common ropers are composed of a rock-like substance, some varieties are composed of different stone. One of the more dangerous mutations is made of a stone similar to basalt. These basalt ropers, also called vulcards, lack their cousin's vulnerability to fire and are instead immune to it. Additionally, these ropers feed on fire, growing stronger and healthier when exposed to it. Far more insidious and dangerous breeds of ropers also exist. Sigil crags, a strange and timeless race of ropers, manifest bizarre and powerful runes of crystal on their rocky exteriors. These sigils of power crystallize after a particularly interesting meal, which usually takes days instead of hours, and most often when the prey is a powerful spellcaster. Sigil crags often munch down the caster's hands first, leaving them incapable of casting spells with somatic components, and then explore his secrets during a lengthy feast. A particularly gruesome breed of roper is the dreaded shard striker. The strands of a shard striker are jagged stone-like threads which rend opponents to shreds even as they ensnare them. These brutish degenerates of the roper race are far less philosophical than others, but they make up for this shortcoming with a healthy dose of sheer viciousness. These demented ropers slice victims to gory bits, often shredding them with all 6 of their deadly strands. Rust monsters. Adventurers of all races and creeds despise the rust monster, not because it's especially horrifying in appearance, nor because it's irredeemably evil, nor even because it's particularly dangerous. Rather, most adventurers' loathing for the strange creature is strictly practical. By their very nature, rust monsters destroy treasure, and it's not unheard of for an armored fighter or paladin to frantically backpedal away from a hungry rust monster, leaving only the wizard and his trusty staff to dispatch the beast. Hunched and armor-plated, the average rust monster is roughly 5 feet long and weighs 200 pounds, its orange or rust-red bulk supported by 4 clawed legs that skitter with surprising speed when it charges. While its appearance with constantly moving fly-like mandibles and twitching propeller tail would be alien and frightening on its own, most who delve into the mountain crevices and mine shafts where rust monsters are most commonly found quickly recognize the creatures for what they are, voracious consumers of anything metallic. Called the locusts of the Darklands by the dwarves, rust monsters prefer iron, steel, and other ferrous alloys, but are capable of instantly oxidizing and devouring any metal objects merely by brushing them with their moth-like antennae. How exactly this process works is a mystery to scholars and magi alike, but even magically reinforced steel is not typically capable of withstanding the alien creature's unique ability. Many are the heroes who, after seeing their holy or enchanted broadswords rust and disintegrate in their hands, would rather face a dragon's wrath than the blank-eyed rust monster's mindless hunger. Ancient beyond compare, the rust monster's origins are lost to the sands of prehistory. While most scholars speculate that they evolved from giant isopods and crustaceans who roamed the ocean floors near geothermal vents, still others suggest that given its supremely alien nature, the rust monster might have been introduced to Golarion by visitors from another world, possibly as an act of aggression designed to slow the march of technology by limiting younger races' access to metals, or as living power generators for some unknown future project. Whatever the case, rust monsters stand alone in their family, bearing similarities to crustaceans, insects, and mammals, but kinship to none. Rust monsters are indeed physiologically fascinating. Like the purple worm or the zorn, rust monsters gain their nourishment from consuming minerals instead of organic matter, but the manner in which they accomplish this is completely unique. Like the electric eel, the rust monster's body acts like a giant battery, capable of storing vast amounts of energy and manifesting it as a unique and powerful electromagnetic field. While this field passes through the flesh of most living creatures without notice, its effect on metals is profound. When metal is contacted by the rust monster's body, particularly its feathery antenna, a circuit is closed and vast amounts of electrical current pour through the object. This supernaturally augmented electrolysis exponentially accelerates the normal rate of oxidization. To the outside observer, the metal simply disintegrates into uselessness. Inside the rust monster, however, a different story plays out. The process of oxidization, called rusting in ferrous metals, releases vast amounts of energy in the form of heat. This energy, gathered by the charged fields focused on the rust monster's antenna, is the true source of the rust monster's life force. Unlike most creatures, the rust monster gains no sustenance from the digestion process, having evolved to absorb energy only in its purest form. While rust monsters are frequently observed gobbling up the rust left behind by a metallic item it has destroyed, this consumption serves a different function, providing the animal with key minerals it needs to form its highly metallic bones and blood. Excess metals go to form the protective carapace on its back, and the plates that armor it are made up almost exclusively of processed iron, giving the beast its typically red-orange coloration. Unlike most insectoid creatures, rust monsters do not lay eggs. Young are born live in litters of 10 to 12 juveniles. At birth, rust monsters are soft and partially transparent, completely boneless, but already possessing long prehensile antennae. This lack of bones helps the young pass through the parent's narrow and armored birth canal. Young are born already able to sense and consume metal, and by a year old, most have already consumed enough ore to build themselves bones and carapace identical to an adult. Not surprisingly, possessing the same powers but easier to manipulate than adults, rust monster juveniles can be extremely valuable in the right markets. Rust monsters live almost exclusively underground and frequently inhabit iron-rich mountain regions, though they have been known to sometimes wander into populated areas and wreak havoc by consuming vast quantities of urban infrastructure. A city with a rust monster loose in its sewer system does not quickly forget the ensuing unpleasantness. Due to their chosen environment, rust monsters are a notorious threat to dwarven societies, with the stout folks' famous forges an irresistible prize to the hungry monsters. While not an everyday occurrence, the problem of rust monster attacks is common enough that most dwarven communities of a given size keep a supply of stone weapons close at hand for just such an occasion. These hunts, when they happen, are impressive and highly ritualized affairs, with histories dating back well before the dwarves emerged onto Galarian surface. In them, young dwarven men prove their bravery by stripping naked, painting their bodies with fungus pigments, and stalking the insectoid creatures with stone spears and axes. Not all interactions between the two groups are violent, however. Though rust monsters are nearly impossible to domesticate, many groups of dwarven miners use leashed specimens to lead them to the best ore deposits. Rust monsters tend to be transient, and rarely stay in one place long enough to make a proper lair. In those cases where a given rust monster finds a vein of ore rich enough to support it for a long time, the chambers it creates are jagged and random, pitted natural caverns connected by long thin cracks and chasms where the beast has sucked a vein dry. These narrow passages, which can stretch for miles, also present convenient hiding places for rust monsters and their young in the face of outside threats. Sewer beasts. Anyone who has ever ventured into the sewers of a great city knows to watch out for two common creatures, dire rats and Otyughs, or sewer beasts. Today, these lumbering monsters root around in the refuse of civilization, perfectly happy to consume that which others throw away. The average Otyugh spends most of its day wandering around in the sewers, looking for tasty garbage to hoard and devour. While not particularly territorial, rival Otyughs sometimes fight over an especially tasty garbage pit or dumping ground. When at rest, an Otyugh buries itself in trash and filth, leaving only one of its tentacles on the surface to keep an eye on its surroundings. As a creature that lives underground, Otyughs are active whenever they are hungry, but those encountered on the surface, such as in a swamp, are usually nocturnal. Those who meet an Otyugh often do so while exploring a sewer or swamp. In such an instance, the Otyugh usually attacks without bothering to communicate, being fearful of outsiders who likely view it as a monster. Those who regularly dwell in their native environments can often strike up an uneasy truce with these lumbering garbage eaters, agreeing to leave their filth alone in exchange for safe passage. Some even make agreements to provide the Otyughs with tasty garbage in exchange for their protection. Despite their beastly appearance, Otyughs are not completely stupid, and they are even capable of speech, typically speaking a broken mix of common and undercommon. They know that others see them as monsters, though, and do not really care so long as they are allowed to feed in peace. Otyughs communicate with one another through a series of tentacle gestures and the release of faint smells into the air. Because Otyughs are most often encountered in a sewer, most creatures would never detect their olfactory communication, but to other Otyughs the scents are quite clear. Although less accurate than most languages, an Otyugh can communicate basic messages and emotions via scent up to a mile in distance, or more if the receiver is downwind, even through a twisting maze of passages. Despite their odd shape and disgusting diet, Otyughs are naturally occurring creatures, not created by magical experimentation or deliberate crossbreeding. Ancient texts speak of large creatures wandering through the swamps on 3 stumps, waving as many tentacles above a crocodile-like maw. Some even theorize that the Otyugh is the primordial relative of the crocodile due to their smaller features and environments. Such swamp-dwelling Otyughs feed off decaying plants and animals in the swamps. When the sewers of the cities became prevalent, many saw these locations as a bountiful feast, owing primarily to the rich fare of the city's inhabitants. Since this migration, Otyughs have thrived. There are few predators in a city's sewer greater than an Otyugh, placing it at the top of the subterranean food chain. The Otyughs are aware of this, and are more than willing to make bargains with their surface-dwelling neighbors if necessary to ensure their security. Otyughs are typically born in the same environment they live in, usually the sewers or swamps. After mating, a female Otyugh carries the growing young internally for about 30 days, at which point the barely mobile leech-like young crawl into a pouch located on their back. There they live for 6 months, parasitically feasting on her blood until she expels them from the pouch in a particularly messy process. The independent young are nursed on sewer water and food chewed by the parent until their own teeth emerge a month later. A young Otyugh spends the first year of its life living with one of its parents, with parents taking turns rearing the children, learning the relatively simple skills it needs to survive. It is also during this time that an Otyugh first learns to speak. This event is important to Otyughs and is celebrated annually with a feast of the most delectable morsels the Otyughs can find. After a year, the young Otyughs leave their parents' dens to find their own. The first dens are usually closer to their parents at first, but as their food intake grows, they move further away to avoid competing for resources. Many cities consider Otyughs to be a pest at worst, while some even value their presence in the sewers as a sort of wandering cleanup crew. Otyugh population is controlled entirely by the food supply, or rather garbage supply. When their population grows too high, Otyughs begin to starve and take more drastic measures for food, including foraging outside their normal habitats. In a city, this usually means that the Otyughs are hunted by the local militia or adventurers until the population is sufficiently trimmed. In the wild, this overpopulation often leads to groups splitting off to find new locations to feed. Whether in a sewer or swamp, Otyughs tend to live a relatively solitary existence, meeting up with others of their kind infrequently. They do not even share a lair with their mates, instead preferring to meet while foraging for choice garbage. Such forays are usually done in silence, with the only communication occurring through scent. Although they live alone, Otyughs do consider themselves part of a loose community of sewer dwellers, which may include non-Otyughs. Whenever there is a threat to their habitat, the eldest Otyugh in a community calls for a moot or gathering. The moot is called by releasing a rather acrid scent, one that all Otyughs recognize implicitly. Despite any difference or rivalries, all Otyughs respond to this call and gather together to discuss the problem and come up with a solution. These moots are chaotic affairs, with each member shouting over the others, trying to get its ideas heard. While not particularly intelligent, Otyughs are relatively crafty and can usually come up with solutions to most of their problems. Most moots are naturally called to discuss a new and possibly dangerous inhabitant to the area or to determine what is to be done when food supply dwindles. Occasionally, moots are called to discuss an alliance with a local group or to resolve a territorial dispute before it gets too violent. Although it is a very rare practice, moots are sometimes convened to elect a leader in times of crisis or war. Such a leader is called a lord by the other Otyughs and is usually obeyed by other members of the community until the crisis is over. Because Otyughs sometimes dwell in environments with dangerous hazards and strange food sources, some exhibit odd mutations and other physical deformities. Such variant Otyughs include corpse feasters. Some Otyughs develop a particular taste for the flesh of dead creatures, preferring it above all other sources of food. As one might imagine, this breed of Otyugh is more likely to attack human settlements in search of food. Corpse feaster Otyughs also possess a particularly heinous ability that allows them to vomit forth a shower of rotting meat and bones as a kind of disgusting breath attack. Oozing Otyughs. Otyughs that dwell in caustic environments, or those that dine on alchemical refuse, may develop the ability to secrete an acidic toxin through their hide. Any creature struck by an oozing Otyugh's tentacle or bite will take additional acid damage. Plague-bearer Otyughs. Considering where they live, Otyughs make for natural disease carrier. Otyughs are immune to filth fever, the most common ailment for those visiting the sewers or swamps, and every Otyugh is a carrier of this disease. Sometimes, however, an Otyugh becomes infected with so many ailments that it becomes a plague-bearer Otyugh. These disgusting creatures are covered in lesions, boils, and rashes, and anyone in combat with them risks contracting a truly terrible sickness. Among their own kind, plague-bearers are regarded as kinds of prophets and make proclamations of dubious wisdom or veracity to others of their kind, who accept these statements as truth. While other Otyughs are smart enough to keep their distance, they often help feed their stricken cousins and use them to punish those who intrude upon their domains. Plague-bearer Otyughs are in constant pain, leading many to believe they are in a sort of rage all the time. Because they lack the proper appendages to soothe their wounds, these wretched creatures spend most of their time mindlessly bashing at anything that moves, desperate to distract themselves from the pain.